The temptation is to look at people like Donald Trump or Boris Johnson and go, oh, what a buffoon, what an uneducated or intellectually basic human being that is. He doesn't understand what he's doing and what he's messing with. When we talk about fascism and we talk about sort of box-ticking exercises within fascism and rolling that out across the US or across the UK, it sounds as though there is, real malice and coordination and manipulation going on behind the scenes. But like, where do you sit on that? Do you think it's that they're just idiots playing with fire, or do you think that they're actually coordinating this to create a fascist state?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of both. I don't think these are mutually exclusive situations. It's very clear that, for example, Donald Trump is an idiot and a buffoon. Similarly with Boris Johnson, he is in many ways the British Trump. But their buffoonery and idiocy is calculated in many ways. But one thing that I always like to tell people is that when I talk about fascism, or when I talk about how the government is, when you talk about COVID, is acting, what's the expression that I use? Incompetence by default. They're by design, incompetence by design. That although all this appearance of incompetence and doing things wrong, making all these crazy mistakes, all of this is by design. I don't mean that there is a cabal of people behind the scenes, in the Tory government, or even the Tory government themselves, not behind the scenes, so getting behind, a closed door and going, ooh, what can we do to push forward our fascist agenda? It's not Machiavellian in that respect, in that I don't believe their project is to have an openly fascist state, but whatever it is that their end goal is, will pass through fascist politics, and you will create this kind of situation that we're in. So what I tell people is that evil is very, very unlikely to take the form of, a Netflix villain or something like it.
Right.
That evil is a series of policies and a series of choices and a system that enables those choices to happen and to take place. And I think that's what we're currently embedded in at the moment, is that perhaps we do have some key figures that are orchestrating what's happening, but they are not operating in a vacuum. They are only able to be as successful as they are because the system is in place to enable that kind of choice and that kind of behavior. So it's not so much a Machiavellian leader that is making these decisions, but a system that is enabling this kind of Machiavellian thing to happen.
Do you think there's an argument there to have something more closely resembling a written constitution? Because my understanding, and remember, I'm not a politics grad or a journalist, so what the fuck do I know? But my understanding of it is that in the absence of a written constitution, much of British politics operates on a sort of an honour basis. You would never expect that a British Prime Minister would behave in this way or that way, or outright lie, or refuse to correct the record. And so the machinations to deal with somebody that has no morals are not there. So do you think, are we sort of edging more closely in a utopian scenario to opening up a conversation about saying, well, look, we've had a close call here with people like Boris Johnson, and what it's shown us is that if a psychopath, a real Machiavellian mastermind, were to rise up to number 10 at some stage, we would be in real serious problems. We wouldn't be able to handle them. Do you think, could you see a written constitution kind of conversation happening?
I don't think a written constitution is foolproof. I mean, the U.S. has a written constitution, and they got Donald Trump. It's if I'm not mistaken, Brazil, where I'm from, also has a written constitution, and we have a quasi-fascist president in power right now, Jair Bolsonaro. So it's a written constitution will not save us, if you know what I mean. I think the checks and balances that are needed to happen, to protect us from a state, from presidents, prime ministers having that much power and taking the country in a direction that is more authoritarian, they do exist already. It's whether or not these checks and balances are working as appropriate. And I don't think they are. And you see in the UK, the British government, the current British government, and I talked about this in one of the episodes of my podcast, Enemies of the People, about what happens, I think it's episode 2, what happens when the government is attacking the rule of law, or it takes the rule of law as an irritant, which this government very much does take the rule of law as an irritation. And Professor Konagiti, who was my guest on that podcast, was talking about how you need the rule of law to keep the government in check. But when the government has the power to attack the rule of law, that's when we see the difficulties. And one of the greatest difficulties that we have in the UK, which I don't think would be solved with the written constitution, is that there's very little separation of powers. We have the executive, which is the government, is basically the legislative. They don't have the checks and balances where a different country that has a different system, like the US, for example, has a Senate and a Congress that are much more divorced from the executive than we have here. So that is a big issue as well.
Yeah.
So I don't think the Constitution would solve any problems.